Hello, welcome back, or welcome if this is your first episode. My name is Emma Devlin, and I am intrigued by true crime, and I attempt to do crafts. Um, this month I have researched a new serial killer. He's not new. He's old, 71 years old to be exact. But the dude that I looked at for this month, his name is Gary Ridgway, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. And I'm also going to be crafting at the same time. So I already got my vinyl ready. I'm going to be making a cup. I got this mug from Target. And then I'm using my standard cut mat, the green Cricut mat, and then Oracle 651 vinyl. So this project was a little different than last month's because last month we were doing an iron-on project, so we had to mirror the vinyl. And this time we're not going to do that. It's going to be transferred onto our cup. So I guess I'll just show you what I have already done. I already uploaded my image. I got it on Etsy. And I don't really know why it's blue. It's not going to be blue when I cut it, but and I made it the size that I want it, which right now is 2 by 4. It's that. And I'm going to cut it here in a little bit, but first I want to go ahead and get started talking about Gary Leon Ridgway. He was born in February of 1949 to Thomas and Mary Ridgway in Salt Lake City, Utah. He was the second of 3 sons to be born to the family. And he had a relatively unstable upbringing, which is something that is going to be common for a lot of the serial killers that we will look at, which is unfortunate, but it kind of explains the negative outlook that they have, especially sometimes towards women. Gary had a very domineering mother. She was known to even have hit his father. Just not a super maternal woman. And his father frequently complained about sex workers, which is kind of a bizarre thing for a dad to complain about, but it will come into play later. And from here on out, I know that it's politically correct to refer to people who work in the sex industry as sex workers now, but a lot of the research I did refer to them as prostitutes because that was, at the time, how they would be referred. So I'm not trying to be politically incorrect, but sometimes I may slip and use the word prostitutes instead of sex workers. He wet the bed until about age 13, which is another thing that is more common than not for people who end up being violent later in life. Not that if you wet the bed, you're a serial killer, but it is one of the traits that some of them have in common. And his mother would very aggressively clean him after he would wet the bed, which led to him being both angry and strangely attracted to his mother. So we got a kind of a weird Oedipus complex kind of going on when he's, his relationships with women are not going to be super healthy. He also suffered from dyslexia, and when his IQ was tested, it was said to be in the low 80s range. So a relatively low IQ and not a super stable family life growing up. At age 16, he committed his first, I guess I guess you could say it's a crime. He led a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed the kid. Okay. The kid ended up surviving, but that should definitely have been a cue that something maybe wasn't super great with Gary. Stabbing children is not what most 16-year-olds do with their free time. He did end up graduating high school in 1969, and he got married to his girlfriend, whose name was Claudia Craig. They didn't have a super great relationship. They were high school sweethearts, and they ended up getting married right before he joined the Navy and was sent over to Vietnam, where he served. Something that unfortunately happened a lot in Vietnam and in lots of wars. He ended up frequently having sex with sex workers. And he ended up contracting gonorrhea from one of the sex workers, which made him even more angry towards the people that his father had hated when he was a child. And it also drove a wedge between him and his wife. She had also been having an affair, so they ended up getting divorced. When he married his second wife, whose name was Marcia Winslow, he became very religious. And that's cool if you're doing it well. But he used religion to make it okay that he was violent because he was the man in the relationship. He showed a lot of sexual deviancy during this time. He would prefer to have sex with his wife in public, which is like not the end of the world, but she was not comfortable with it, so it was not 100% consensual the way he went about it. And he also continued to have relationships with sex workers, even when he was back in the United States, which is where his crimes began. And I'm going to pause there and go and cut my vinyl, and then I will show you what we're doing from there. Okay, I am back. I have cut out my vinyl, which you can't really see, but the next thing I have to do is weed it, which is take off all the excess, which is actually really coming off really easily. I spoke too soon. And then you just have to take out the small pieces once you get the big stuff off. Okay, so now you can see I have my what's going to go on the cup, and I'm just going to take out the little pieces. But this is around when Gary started to commit his crimes. So what he would do, and I don't generally like to just gloss over the victims, but he killed at least 49 people. I have an image down here with all of their faces. So generally speaking, he would pick up women and girls on the side of the road, many of whom were sex workers or teenagers running away from home. And then he would show them a picture of his son, Matthew, who he had had with Marcia in 1975 to kind of gain their trust. And then he would usually engage in some sort of sexual activity with them, at which point he would strangle them. And when he started out, he was strangling them with his hands, but it was painful to do that. He would injure himself a lot of the times. So at that point, he started to use ligatures, which is any like type of fabric that you would use to cut off air from someone's throat. He usually assaulted these women in his truck, or he would take them back to his house. And most of the bodies were dumped around the Green River, often left nude and posed in strange positions. He gained the name the Green River Killer because of where he dumped his victims. And he occasionally returned to the dump to engage in necrophilic activities, which I don't want to get too much into, but he would further assault these bodies after he had murdered them. He did leave different objects around the sites to try to confuse police. So sometimes he would leave like gum or cigarettes that other people had used, so that if they were to look for evidence, it wouldn't be connected to him. He was arrested in 1982 for charges relating to prostitution and soliciting a prostitute. They began to suspect that he may have been capable of committing these murders, and he became a suspect in 1983. But he passed 2 polygraph tests, so 2 lie detector tests, which generally aren't super reliable, but he passed them, and there was no further suspicion that it would be him, other than the fact that he tended to solicit prostitutes. He got a divorce from Marcia and met Judith Mawson in 1985. They ended up getting married in 1988, and when investigators ended up interviewing Judith, she mentioned that she found it a little odd that when they started dating, he didn't have any carpet at his house. And the detective said, chances are he used the carpet to dispose of the body. And I just think it's so disturbing that she spent time with this man, and he was using his house as a place to dispose of his victims. But Ridgway does claim that while he was with Judith, his kill rate went down because he actually was really, truly in love with her. And it appears that he only killed about 3 women while they were together. So that might be true. DNA evidence was collected in 1987, but was not analyzed until later. And they used that DNA to procure an arrest warrant. So police ended up arresting Ridgway at his workplace. He was working at he was a painter, on November 30th of 2001. So he was killing folks from the early 1980s until the 2000s. So he's a very prolific serial killer. He was arrested initially because he was suspected of having killed four women. And the 4 women that he was initially under suspicion for killing were Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. But upon linking his DNA to those victims, 3 additional victims were added to his indictment because they had paint fibers that were from a paint that was only used in by his company, and that was enough evidence to add 3 more victims to his charges. So at this point, he had 7 victims that he was being charged for killing. On November 5th of 2003, so almost 2 whole years later, he entered a guilty plea to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder as part of a plea bargain that would then spare him the possibility of the death penalty, which 48 murders is probably going to get you the death penalty. So to try to avoid the death penalty, he pled guilty and then was willing to exchange cooperation with the police in helping them find the bodies. So that was their end of the deal in the plea bargain. He claimed that all of his victims had been killed in King County, Washington, which is, as some of you will know, where Ted Bundy did a lot of his killings. And interestingly enough, before Gary Ridgway was caught, clearly a lot before, because Ted was executed before 2000, they used Ted Bundy's, I guess the word is expertise, to try to pinpoint who the killer might be. And because they were in the same killing grounds and they seemed to have a similar MO. So all of his victims were from King County, Washington, but he did say that he had dumped 2 bodies in Portland to try to confuse the investigation. 41 out of those 49 victims would not have been included in the charges against him if it weren't for the plea bargain. So prosecutors agreed to it because they were trying to give the families some closure, because otherwise these wouldn't have been solved. And he was offering to lead them to the bodies, the disposal sites. On December 18th of 2003, so about a month later, he was sentenced to 48 life sentences with no possibility of parole, and 1 life sentence to be served consecutively, plus 10 years per victim for tampering with evidence. So that would be 48 life sentences plus 480 years that he would be serving. In fall of 2003, he then led detectives to 3 bodies, and subsequently in 2005, 2 hikers separately, 2 separate hiking expeditions, found 2 skulls of 2 more victims. I'm going to pause there and show you what we're doing. This is transfer tape. So the goal is that we're going to get this to stick onto this so that we can then transfer it onto the cup. So what you're going to do for this is you're going to peel the sticky part off. The sticky part's what you want, the clear part. And then you are going to stick your vinyl onto that sticky part, and you're going to press down real hard. And depending on the transfer tape, sometimes it's just like incredibly sticky and it's hard to get the vinyl to then come off onto the cup. So we're gonna just do our best, but I pushed it on there real nice and strong. So I have I don't know if you can see it, I have my lettering that I'm going to then put onto my cup. So here's my cup. I'm going to try to line it up the best that I can. They make fancy tools for this, but I don't have any fancy tools. So I'm just going to do my best. And it's kind of challenging because it is on a curvy surface, because cups are kind of curvy. So I'm going to do one line and then I'm going to go down and do the next line, just to try to make it a little less difficult. Luckily, I am making this for a friend, and so she will be forgiving of me for my imperfections. If you are making this for someone who's paying for it, good luck, because I've never done that before. But while I keep doing this, Ridgway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer to date. So he would be considered the most prolific serial killer to date, like even now. Over 5 months, he confessed to 48 murders, 42 of which aligned to the probable Green River Killer victims. But in recorded investigations, he claimed to be responsible for anywhere from 65 to 71 murders. So only 49 of those have been proven, but he has confessed to more than that. He admitted to targeting prostitutes because they were, quote, easy to pick up, and he, quote, hated most of them, which we know comes from his childhood and also from his experiences in Vietnam. At this point, he also confessed to necrophilia, acts of necrophilia, and claimed that he started burying the victims to try to deter himself from going back to them after he had dumped them. He went on to claim that murdering these young women was his career, so he took it very seriously. He was placed in solitary confinement in Walla Walla, Washington, which I'm going to say a couple more times because it's really fun to say, where he served until he was then transferred to Colorado in May of 2015. But upon further discussion, the police decided that it would be better to have him back in Washington so that he could be available for any open murder case investigations so that they could question him and run those by him, because at this point he was pretty much confessing. If he did it, he would say he did it. So they moved him back to Walla Walla, Washington in October of 2015. And at that point, authorities had located at least 48 sets of remains. When, again, with these hikers, man, they're just on top of it. They discovered the skull of Rebecca Marrero, which was a new victim. Ridgway pled guilty to that as well, adding another life sentence to his total. So he's now up to 49 life sentences and 490 additional years for tampering with the evidence. There are at least 3 women that are still unknown amongst his victims, meaning no one has ever been able to identify them. And there are at least 5 unsolved cases that have him as the main potential suspect that have not been solved yet, and he's not confessed to them, but he is the main suspect. He is currently 71 years old and serving the remainder of his life sentence in Walla Walla, Washington. So that is Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. And I have finished my cup. It is definitely not the best thing I've ever done. There are a couple wrinkles, but there you have it. Boy Mom Fuel. And as long as she doesn't put it in the dishwasher, it will be okay. So, next month, I'm going to talk about Jerry Brudos, which if you've watched Mindhunter, you will be familiar with this guy. And if you have any suggestions for crafts that you would like to watch me fail at making, let me know. And until then, do not get in the car with any strangers. Bye.